Good afternoon, everyone. Selamat sore, ya, from friends in Indonesia, and goedemorgen from friends in the Netherlands. I guess it's still morning, and bonjour, yeah, for friends in Paris. I don't know how to say it in Italy or other countries. Sorry. So this is the last day of the conference. The last day and the last panel, I guess, right? Panel 6, and we have wonderful panel entitled Politics of Marginality in Contemporary Indonesia. This panel will be led by Jafar, Suryomenggolo, and Amanda Theosit. But Amanda is today, right now, is not able to be here. But we have Jafar, who will act as the chair of the session. So before we start, as usual, this panel, I would like to introduce that it's hosted by Diponegoro University in Semarang, Central Java, Indonesia, together with LP3IS Jakarta. And as usual, the house rule is that if you want to ask questions, you can write in the chat room. And if you want to, in the Q&A session, you can raise hands and ask your questions directly as well. And please keep yourself in a mute mode during the presentation. Maybe that's all the house rule for today. And now I will give the screen to Jafar. Jafar, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Wijayanto, and thank you for the Undip staff. We are very honored to have you to host us here. And thank you everyone to coming to our panels. My name is Jafar. I'm a visiting fellow at the Institute for Southeast Asian Studies, Jeonbuk National University in Korea. My co-host, co-organizer is Amanda Theosit from German Institute for Global and Area Studies, Giga Hamburg, Germany. I'm going to read my note for the introduction. Indonesia entered the 21st century after a quick yet bloody regime change in 1998. The Reformasi have opened the doors for the reconfigurations and improvement of Indonesia institutions to support economic growth. However, as succeeding governments have failed to regulate the redistributions of wealth after democratization, Indonesia is now faced with the double challenges of uncontainable urbanizations and rising inequality. Inevitably, in this age of compressed development, Indonesia has to deal with the policy scratch between investment in physical infrastructure, such as building roads and ports, or in social development and environmental protections. Scholars have noted that the current president of Indonesia, Mr. Joko Widodo, prioritized the former over the later ones. In this panel, we will discuss the intersection of issues related to inequality and social positions in the context of social, political, and economic transformation underway in Indonesia. We will look into how subaltern communities experience their daily life, shaped by these economic changes, and the rise of right-based mobilization as shaped by democratization. It includes issues related to urban squatter, right to the city, marginalized identities, trans-organizing, and feminizations of poverty. We have invited 3 scholars to enrich our discussion. First scholar is Mark Philip Stadler from University of Copenhagen on urban poor activism in Jakarta. Second scholar is Frediansyah Tayyip from Friedrich Alexander University of Erlangen-Nuremberg with his 2 collaborators, Benjamin Hagarty and Amalia Handayani, on trans-organizing and memory of HIV/AIDS in Yogyakarta. Third scholar is Veronica Kusumayati from Georgetown University on social transformations and feminizations of poverty among the indigenous Papuans. We will start with Mark. each presenter have 15 minutes, and we will keep the last 10 minutes for Q&A. You have the floor now, Marx.
Yes, thank you very much, Jafar, for the invitation to this panel. It's a very crucial panel, and I would like to ask the staff in Diponegoro if there is a chance to put up my presentation. But let me extend my greetings to the staff in Diponegoro University, Vijay Wijayanto. Hello again. I'm very happy to see you in this hybrid format. And hello to Ferdi and Veronica. I hope to meet you in person, and I hope there is a chance that our panel will become a somewhat publication in the near future. My talk is based on several years of research in Jakarta. It's my research in the urban poor communities of various organizations, which for the sake of brevity and for the sake of also privacy, I will not mention right now, but my research is basically one social movement, one NGO, as well as one activist group. So I also try to cover different organization forms and social movements. All in all, I analyze in my research civil society struggles against what I want to theorize as an urban capitalist hegemony and authoritarian populist urbanism. Please move on to the next slide. A very quick overview of what I'm going to do. I think the first slide or the first chapter is almost not necessary, as all of us are Indonesia specialists or have been to the country so many times. So what I'm going to tell you is probably not new. Then I'm going to talk about urban poor problems, which directly relate to how I want to theorize the urban capitalist hegemony as well as the authoritarian populist urbanism. And finally, I'm going to talk about the role of urban poor activism, and I want to give out a positive, somewhat prospect what could be their role in politics as well. To the next slide, please. Jakarta will be the capital city of the Republic of Indonesia until the year of 2024. This is now decided, has been decided finally at the beginning of this year by current President Joko Widodo. Indonesia has some 270, 275 million citizens. And as in many countries, Jakarta as well has the special capital regions. Many countries have this. If you look into urban studies, many urban capital cities have a special region. This is the same for Indonesia. It's called Daerah Khusus Ibu Kota, or abbreviated as DKI. In Jakarta center, more than 11 million citizens live, but in the metropolitan and suburban area, there are some or more than 34 million people currently. These are absolute new numbers which I've received just a few weeks ago from a researcher from the University of Duisburg-Essen. If you look into the ratio of this capital city, vice versa, the overall population of the country or the nation of Indonesia. So Greater Jakarta has more than 20% of Java's total population, or approximately some 12.5 or more of Indonesia's total population. So Indonesia is already a very populous country, but looking at the ratio of the capital city versus the overall general population, this is humongous, and this is a mega city, and comparable to many cities elsewhere in the global south or in the developing world. Nevertheless, Jakarta is an example where there's so much population, where urban politics matters on a national scale, therefore. Jakarta has 6 satellite cities, which are Bogor, Depok, Tangerang, Bekasi, Puncak, Cianjur, and they are meanwhile added, abbreviated as Jabodetabek Punjur. and is estimated to be one of the largest cities of the world with more than 40 million inhabitants in 2030. Much of the urban area of Jakarta is still organized in the traditionally grown and cultural grown kampung, urban villages or urban settlements. However, it is very difficult to really estimate how many kampung there are. So some civil society estimates say there are some 800s. The just out of office governor Anies Baswedan, very populist among some communities, has said that, oh no, Jakarta has more than 1,000 kampungs. Well, it is somewhere in between apparently. But the thing is, and this is already one of the main points, most of the soil is in or has an informal status, which means that the ownership is not clear, is unclear, whether it belongs to the local dwellers, whether it belongs to the city or private owners, and is often not clear and is contested. I need to make a bit of a correction to the very last point here, which is saying that some 60%, or approximate 60% of overall population of some of the kampung, not of the entire city, but some of the kampung can be classified as poor. So there are some kampung which can be classified as very poor or as urban poor. And I would like to move forward with urban poor problems, telling you what can be understood as poverty or urban poverty, especially. And but for this, I'd like to give you a very brief photo first of Jakarta, the way I have experienced it during, next slide, please, slide number 4. During much of my research, and I was as a PhD student, I was in a position where I was somewhat living in a cost, but nevertheless, I was having that kind of view most of the time during one day. So I was living and participating during my research in the kampung, but sometimes after the kampung, I went to a supermarket, just a local supermarket or a mall, and then I was in a completely different world. So it is wall by wall that you have a development of luxury malls. There are more than 180 luxury malls in Jakarta, or skyscrapers where you just wanted to go to a supermarket and get water, but actually you entered an entirely different world. And this is something that, to be very honest to you, really occupied me, and was quite depressing at some point during my research, to see this kind of inequality in the same vicinity of the same city. Now I move on to the so-called urban problems, or urban poor problems. Slide 5, please. And this is a very heuristic summary, but nevertheless, I'd like to make a point that, you know, poverty can be poverty of education. It can be poverty of in so many understandings, that urban poverty can be an aspect, or can be a term to summarize these kind of different ways of experiencing poverty. And that's why the summary of poverty can be this large for some of the kampung. That's why the data of 60% for some of the kampung is really applicable, because it is data from the civil society organizations themselves. Many urban poor do not have any regular income or no income, or their labor status or citizen status is informal. Housing or tenure of land status, oftentimes resulting from evictions or forced resettlements, is also unclear. And this is what I was saying before. Much of the land in Jakarta is still unclear. There's lack of democratic and cultural participation, which is the result of the first point. Limited or no access to labor market, education, urban infrastructure, resources, water, gas, electricity, as well as mobility, as well as higher exposures to health hazards, such as local epidemics and global pandemics, and higher exposure to environmental pollution of water and air. and higher risk of becoming a victim of natural disasters. These kind of living at the margin in the urban context can be subsumed as urban poverty, or being prone to or being how to say, exposed to urban poverty. And finally, and this is my point that I'd like to theorize in the paper, I probably don't have time to do that right now, is that the experience with the state or the city administration is that of an urban capitalist hegemony. I go back to the Gramscian theory of how he theorizes hegemony, and that hegemony, so you cannot really interact or to have a collaboration properly, and it's sort of like you have to struggle against it, not with it, but against it, really, is accumulated with the urban problems that I stated above. At the same time, and this is then the environment in the city, there's a strong anti-poor sentiment, as well as degradation of the urban poor as sort of second-class citizens in the urban society, which includes media as well as politics. And this I try to theorize or frame as authoritarian populist urbanism. So I just make an example. For example, when there is flooding, there is no how to say, causal correlation, but it often leads local politicians, not necessarily the governor, but local politicians on the middle level, not on the kampung level, but on the middle administrative level, to sort of say, oh, the poor were those who are the reason why there is flooding, right? But it doesn't talk about like the sinking of the city or the rise of the sea levels because of global climate change, or it doesn't take any other things into account. And this is what the environment or the societal sentiment is not pro-poor. And this is what I would like to say with this. Next slide, please. Slide number 6. Not in order to show private or to show persons, I just like to show you where I've been doing the research and where I've encountered where I've conducted my research and where I have collected my data, and where I've also lived in many cases. So the different groups that I've been alluding to at the very start, they have invited me for some live-in situations. I've stayed many times overnight in kampungs in the very north of Jakarta, but also in the very east, and very different kampung, and also accompanied by some of the activists. Next slide, please. It's just one more impression from another kampung. And one more thing about this authoritarian populist urbanism is for example, trash, or the problem of waste management is often again pushed back to the urban poor, that they are the reason for that there's this accumulation of trash, or there's a trash problem. Finally, the slide number 8. Please. Yes, and I have a look at the time. 2 minutes, I think. There are technical solutions and fixes to basically all urban problems that I've mentioned. But the interesting thing is, because of the informality of many kampung, there is not necessarily a kampung-based coordination or implementation of many of the fixes. So the urban poor activists actually fill a void, but they also have a very important, let's say, political position. The thing is that I've met dozens of organizations, urban poor, also foreign, not Indonesian, then one aspect or one topic-based activists and so on. But I've chosen generalist urban poor activists because they have the overview and the knowledge of the community, and most of the times they are actually from the community and they live there where they do their activism. And these urban poor activists actually can tackle as well as coordinate and execute solutions to a number of the urban problems at once for one kampung. And through their networks, and I've researched the networks, of course, adapt their approaches for other kampungs at the same time. So the interesting thing is I've mentioned between 800 or 1,000 kampungs. If, for example, one of the groups has some 30 kampungs within their reach of the network, so that's approximately up to 100 kampungs where the organizations that I've researched could do impact or could have an impact. And finally, yeah, I've made the point that life, survival, and thrive through the urban problems is experienced by the local activists themselves. So they are from the communities, they're not from outside, they're not from a different social class. And they could take up the role as drivers of social transformation on the kampung level and work as so-called, what I want to theorize, yes, thank you, 1 minute, as interface actors. So many of these urban poor activists, meanwhile, have good connections to both administration, politics, some local businesses, some local enterprises, as well as international networks. So this is very interesting because they build up political power and political agency. A small group, you can say a small avant-garde activist group, can bring about a change to quite a huge number of kampungs at a time. This is the point I've made earlier, actually, already. And those activists that I've researched, some of the groups joined forces with progressive politicians, unions, political parties, or social movements, and thereby increase their agency and political punching power for the poor. So this is quite interesting because I made the point earlier that urban politics is on a relative rise in relation to national politics. So if something is happening on an urban scale in Jakarta, this could affect, first of all other cities in Indonesia, but then too, it could have an effect regionally as well as to their international networks globally. The theoretical body that I'm also interested in, or that I'm affiliated to, is called Global Urban Studies. So we are very interested in seeing what are solutions to urban problems in Jakarta and see where we can implement some of those solutions here in Europe or elsewhere in the world. So yeah, there's a global urban correlation. For now, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your attention. This is my final slide. Terima kasih banyak. And you're welcome. My final slide just says thank you. Slide number 9, please. And I hope to get good feedback. I hope I have an interesting writing process with the panel, Ferdi and Veronica and Jafar and Amanda. And I just say thank you, even though I don't see the slide right now, but this is my final point. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to receive questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. For any of you, we're going to pull out the questions later on. Next, we're going to have Ferdi on transorganizing in Yogyakarta. Please, Ferdi.
I think we cannot hear you yet.
Yes, Ferdi, we see your PowerPoint perfectly well, but we can't hear you yet.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you see my PowerPoint now? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
All fine.
And it's moving,
Yes.
and it's moving fine now. Okay.
Yes.
We see the PowerPoint, we hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry. Yeah, and good morning from currently cloudy and cold Berlin. Thank you, Jafar, for the invitation and for organizing the panel. And it's good to see everyone here. Also my co-panelists, Mark and Vero. So I will just begin my presentation. I hope this can speak to the invitation that Jafar and Amanda sent out regarding to the topic around politics of marginality. but also I hope that it could also speak to the larger theme of the conference, which is around engagement and on collaboration between researchers, activists, and laypersons. So my research or my study is a collaborative work with Benjamin Haggerty from now in Deakin University, and then Amalia Handayani, who is in Unika Atmajaya and also two other local collaborators from Yogyakarta, which I will explain a bit further later. But basically, we started this research, and it's still ongoing. Actually, last year, or 2001 already, where we want to start with COVID-19 as an entry point to understand the historical experience of HIV in shaping community life. So in this research, we invite Kebaya Foundation or Yayasan Kebaya and other related organizations, Waria Crisis Center, which is basically there are two out of the few trans women organization or trans-led organization in Yogyakarta, not only as the main resource persons, but also as support provider of the research by becoming partners in developing research methods and facilitating access to research participants from the community, assisted by Ruli Malay and Arum Arishka. So the objective of the research is to collect oral history of HIV/AIDS in Yogyakarta within popular discourse, public knowledge, community response, in forms of also activism, their forms of care and life histories. We also want to document the collective memories of citizens, especially to how the trans women community negotiated stigma and discrimination, build network of solidarity actions between grassroots communities, and encourage changes at the policy level. And also we would like to map ongoing support for community initiative in HIV/AIDS care and prevention at present and into the future. So our main interlocutors are either affiliated to Kebaya and or the Waria Crisis Center or WCC. Maybe also to give a bit of a context, Kebaya is established in 2006 already, but also it was formed already as a response to the high number of trans women in Yogyakarta who were dying of AIDS, basically. It was a group of, I think, medical doctors did some research, and then they come up with this number, and actually this already show a kind of like a deep relationship between community organizing and research and academic works with regards to how research finding could actually push community members to organize themselves. And so Kebaya was formed with a focus on HIV prevention. And I think since 2015, they receive support from the provincial government to Dinas Sosial or the social bureau for the operation of shelter for people living with HIV. And then the second group that we are working with, established in 2019, is Waria Crisis Center, or WCC, led and founded by Ruli Malay, which basically tried to provide support for trans women in dealing with economic and legal challenges that they face. And since the COVID-19, they also start to build an actual shelter, basically provided for trans women who are aging or are ill. And for our methods, we did work with 20 persons affiliated to Kebaya WCC, and we did interview online mostly. And actually, the participants were decided by Ruli Malay and Aro Mariska as our local contact, and they organized also of course, the logistic of like the technical logistic of it. But this is very crucial, I found. And then but because they're not only providing this kind of more technical support, but also they're the ones who set the pace, like, because a lot of time there always something happening on the ground, whether people get ill or there's someone dying, or someone has to go to the hospital, that they're the ones basically who try to, sometimes the study schedule could be very rigid, and they kind of like negotiate this kind of structure already since the beginning on. We did a life story approach, looking at how not only their first encounters with HIV issues, but also looking at other moments in their life that they deem important to share, basically. After the whole series, so the interview we did at least twice, because I think it's important that not only we learn the first hand experience of the trans woman, but also we dig deeper the questions together, and then on the second part we basically create new question out of the first ones. And out of these stories, we then compile them and collect them, and then we meet in person in May 2022 to do a focus group discussion with the whole interview participants, and create this kind of timeline together, and then we verify the stories with the community members, basically. But we didn't just stop there, because the half of the focus group discussion were also spent on talking about how do community members perceive research, basically, what is good and bad research for them. Because the context is, again, as I told you, not only the transfluent community in Yogyakarta and the organization that is related to them has already offer research, not just by academics from abroad, but also from local universities, like students doing their bachelor thesis or master degrees, and so on and so forth. So they're quite exposed to research practices, basically. And one of their biggest question or the challenges that they put is actually the questions around dissemination and representation, like what does all this research being does about us actually has contribute to our own well-being. So there's a lot of conversation about how to revisit and recontextualizing research ethic that fits to the community needs and interests. And as a part of our engagement as well, on later days during that trip in Jogja, as we collaborate with, because I'm also part of a collective called Kunci, and we host a workshop. Basically, it's also for public, but also involving the community members, transparent community members, and we call it as knowledge. The workshop is about knowledge solidarity in pandemic crisis, where again we go deeper into we invite Ignatius Prapto Raharjo, for instance, a well-known researcher working on HIV among trans communities, and also Tamara, who is an artist and also produce documentary films about Bisu community in South Sulawesi. So basically, cultural producers and academics working on trans women issues already in Indonesia, and then as kind of a resource person, and then we ask them questions around what what is actually the challenge or like the limitations and also the benefits on doing community-based research regarding trans women communities, and also actually involving the workshop participants to kind of already discuss and brainstorm around how then solidarity could be formed around this particular line of work. With regards to the follow-up of our research, as I said, this is still ongoing, but we created a platform based on Peche. Peche is a platform for experimental collaborative ethnography, which is available online and actually it's open for public and address diverse audience, including academics, but also the community participants to kind of analyze and to share, but also analyze the data together. And then in this Peche platform, we create the so-called Pangkalan Data HIV or PDKT HIV, which actually one of the kind of outcome or results is this timeline that we create together that go back into the 1980s when the HIV epidemic began to make its mark in globally, but also then how then it goes into local context and in relation also to national policy and national condition. Another thing that came out of that experience of doing workshop and focus group discussion is Benjamin Haggerty, one of my collaborator working with Anissa Beta from University of Melbourne, create the network called Jaringan Ethnography Terbuka, which is a forum for, again, researchers, community members, activists, and civil society members to develop together ethnographic research method and doing collaborative work together. As a conclusion, I would say that based on our research that we learned that the transpuan community is not only that they're being subjected to all this marginalization and also discrimination in relation to HIV/AIDS as well, but they're not just victims of it, but then actually they make strategic steps to advocate and imagine other forms of support and care. And I guess this is something that will be delved into more in the text that we produce together. I guess that's that for my presentation, and thank you for your attention and looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Ferdi. We already have 2 questions for Mark and 1 for Ferdi in the chat box. Please check it. Next, we're going to have Veronica on social transformations and feminizations of poverty among the indigenous Papuans. Please, Veronica. Vero, your voice, unmute, please.
Sorry. Thank you so much for Jafar for organizing this panel, and thank you for the organizer. I would like to talk about my ongoing research in West Papua. So in 2020, I spent a few weeks in the highland of West Papua, where many men and young people have left the agricultural communities of the Hubula people. The Hubula have cultivated sweet potatoes for at least 10,000 years, and pigs have been domesticated since at least 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Famous for their fertile land, the Hubula had also organized the largest pig feast in the region, where the feast could involve slaughter of thousands of pigs. But since at least the 1970s, pig feasts were no longer held in this part of the region. A lot of productive agricultural land have also been left abandoned. When I was there, only middle-aged and elderly women work in the garden while men and young people either go to Jayapura, the capital city, or spend their time in the capital city of Jayawijaya Regency, Wamena. A woman told me that the infusion of Dana Desa or village fund have made men prefer to stay in the city. They are no longer interested in working on the garden. The same story is shared by the Indonesian activists working in the southern part of West Papua. Helped by the new infusion of cash from logging and palm oil companies, men prefer to stay in Merauke and other towns associated with city life and modernity. He says, in remote areas, villages are predominantly women. Men tend to migrate to the cities. My presentation today aims to explore the impact of this local migration among the indigenous Papuan of the Central Highland in Indonesia easternmost and marginalized provinces of Papua. While migration has been seen as one of the main drivers of socio-ecological transformation in the urban space, its impact in rural areas have been poorly understood, especially in eastern Indonesia. Focusing on the shift of Papuan livelihood and the reorganization of agriculture in the rural highland, this ongoing study discusses how migration has led to the feminization of poverty among the indigenous people and how women devise strategies of survival amid a slow but radical social transformation going on in their communities. The argument will be carried out through three distinct inquiries. First, the root of the men migration to the city. Second, feminization of the rural area. And I'll conclude the presentation with a call for intersectional analysis of race, gender, and capitalism in the indigenous frontier. This research is carried out in West Papua, and as an anthropologist, I have worked in the area since 2011, and I use historical ethnographic research in the city of Jayapura and Highland, primarily in Jayawijaya Regency, where the Hubula lives, and May country in Paniai, Dulgia. So this research is still in progress. First, the route of men migration to the city. Papuan men and women have moved from one place to another since time immemorial. In my other studies, I have examined Papuan migration to the city. Yet, since the enactment of the special autonomy status in 2001, the enactment of Indonesian Village Law number 6, 2014, and other policies oriented toward modernizing Papuan economy, more and more men move and make livelihood in the city. While in most cases, this migration is circulatory, the impact of the migration is thoroughly felt in the rural areas. As recounted by one church worker from the highland, she says, those who live in the highland are mainly women. They are farmers and illiterate. Men go and live in the city, usually in the kabupaten or regency capital, talking politics. They do not have a sense of responsibilities toward their families. Women have to work hard, tend garden and their pigs, cook and take care of the children, send children to school, and so forth. Women are also primary wage or cash earner for the family by selling their produce in the marketplaces. End quote. Another story from Paniai even used the word depopulation. He said, "We have seen a depopulation of indigenous Papuan, and more so in the rural areas. One village now comprises of merely 500 to 600 people, and a district around 1,000 to 2,000 people, compared to, for instance, Jafar, the average population of a village is like 3,000. So men go and hang out in the cities, but women stay at the villages. Men spend their time gambling, main togel, and drinking in the city, while increasingly women are involved too, playing togel." End quote. These stories from two different parts of West Papua illustrate the urgency that the Papuan countryside is facing. It also indicates one among many reasons of the men migration to the city, namely newly introduced development policies that are migrant and urban oriented. One of the policy is the infusion of large amount of money into the Papuan countryside, ironically. Most of this money comes from the expansion of extractive industry to the rural frontier as occurred in the southern part of West Papua, like in Mimika or Merauke. But also it comes from the government program of cash transfer. Although in Indonesia and even many parts of the world, the provision of direct cash assistance to people who are considered poor has become a doctrine, not only of the state, but also for global institutions such as World Bank. In West Papua, this practice is relatively new. The impact, in contrast to the rest of the country, is also very dramatic. Various parties, especially the government, saw that direct cash transfer and village fund have positive impact on the community. Village fund, for instance, have not only succeeded in supporting the development of village infrastructure, such as bridges and clean water facilities, but they are also considered successful in increasing the level of community participation in development. But what is clear from this program that is very popular among politicians, including President Joko Widodo, is that the provision of funds was considered a new system of political patronage. And scholars have also examined the shift of productive to distributive form of governance here. But while paying attention to this dimension, village fund and other cash payment have massive impact because it assists and use institutional structure of village. Through this village fund mechanism, each village in West Papua received approximately 900 direct cash fund, or almost 1 billion rupiah, which are given 2 or 3 times a year. Most of this money is distributed through household head, who are defined as men. So there has been a process of patriarchization of Papuan kinship structure in rural areas. This money can also be accessed and used only in the city, because in the rural areas you don't need cash. Without access to decision-making process, women are excluded from the policy, thus also from the money intended to help them in the first place. The second part of this problem is that in West Papua, rural areas not only are more feminized, but they are also more impoverished, despite the infusion of cash. Papua has the highest proportion of people living in poverty in the country, with indigenous women and children facing multiple vulnerabilities associated with poverty. On average, the poverty rate in rural areas in West Papua around 35% compared to urban area at 5%. Extractive industries and urbanization have exacerbated the issue for women, as corporations have expropriated large tracts of indigenous land and resources. So despite their participation in the agriculture, women are more likely to work in informal businesses or family enterprises, which mostly yield lower profit and provide less livelihood security. In rural areas, women have less option for work and mobility, also because their level of literacy and cultural obligation for child and elderly care. So this, I think, is not enough to analyze the Papuan case using a classical political economic analysis of migration, or see this as merely a reflection of the capitalist and statist expansion to the indigenous rural frontiers. The Papuan case requires an intersectionality analysis of migration, as migration has shifted Papuan livelihood, especially among men, and the reorganization of agriculture without men, with some exception in coffee growing areas in the highland. Of course, Papuan women are not silent. They defy strategies of survival. For instance, through their involvement into the cash economy itself. So I think the ironic of this process is that the Papuan women either integrated themselves into this cash economy or go to urban cities like their husband or brothers. And rural women occupy women occupy the forefront of this transformation through the re-emergence of Papuan indigenous women as a political actors in the marketplaces. It is my argument here that the birth of the category of Mama Pasar, or marketplaces mother, is a form of politic that emerged from this transformation. And my future project will look this connection between women, Papuan indigenous women, as a new political actors with the larger process of politicization of West Papuan capitalist transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vero. Yes, we have two questions for Mark, one question for Freddy, and one question to Vero. We have roughly 9 minutes now. Please go, Max.
Yeah, so I received a question from Saskia, and can you briefly tell me where is... there's the other question. All right, I see it. Yeah. Okay, because I haven't seen the other question yet, let me quickly refer to the one from Saskia. She asked whether it is my feeling that urban poverty is somewhat like deeper or more drastic, or precarity is deeper. And the thing is that, you know, my research is not to divide between the rural and the urban, but I see that when we understand, I hear a lot of paper noise in the back. I don't know. It is not my intention, if I look at urban poverty, to sort of like compare it or to say which one is more drastic or not, but to understand the movement of capital or capitalism behind it, and that at least the movement is usually from the rural to the urban. So that the what I can see is that a solution to to rural poverty is often basically the movement to the city, but this is just a move, right? Whereas and this is not based on any causal or any research, but the thing is that basically there is interdependence between rural and urban poverty, and I think there are certain aspects which are certainly different. But the thing is, the urban poverty, in my understanding, is then the end of the road. So it's basically where when you arrive in the city and where you try to make it, and some people get a job and get a house or get a location, get a place to live, but in the rural areas, this is usually, you know, for example, the evictions is not a problem usually. But we can see from Vero's presentation that you know, big corporations of extractive industries actually also force people. So again, there are similarities. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's more drastic, but it has different forms. But to eradicate poverty, you need to do both. You need to eradicate urban as well as rural poverty. I haven't seen the other question. I'm very unfortunately. Maybe I can quickly go over to another speaker and just come back in a second when I've read my question here, because I think it's a bit.
Maybe I could answer the question
Yes,
from
please,
Saskia.
Freddy.
Thank you, Saskia. So the organizing among trans men or trans laki-laki or trans pria in Indonesia is still quite young. I only know so far 3 organizations, but this is more on like national level. There's this Trans Men Indonesia, or TI, which is founded in 2015. And then Persatuan Priawan Indonesia, Indonesian Trans Men Association, and Trans Men Talk. And a lot of the, I think I can only follow them online, but the focus with regards to health is mostly they address issues around mental health, but also around transitioning and about the challenges, and also more like a kind of like bodily practices that supports trans men well-being. That's my answer to your question, Saskia.
Thank you, Freddy. Veronica, please.
Thank you for the question, Calvin. So cash management among the rural area. So I think the institution that work a lot with indigenous population are the church. And we see that some churches have initiative of like economic empowerment. For instance, the Catholic Church has been involved in coffee plantation in the western part of Highland in Pania region, and also in Bintang, Pegunungan Bintang or Starry Mountain. There are also some, like non-religious institutions like NGOs who also work with coffee farmers. And I think the most interesting thing about coffee farmers is that it's a men and women initiative, so it's not only women. But I think in Wamena in particular, in Jayawijaya Yaukimo regencies, almost all like agricultural activities are carried out by women, or predominantly women. So cash crop like coffee, I think give a new initiative for men to stay in the villages. And but we will see, because coffee market are really dependent on the world market. And there are a lot of initiatives like to do that right now. But yeah, I think it's this new invasion of cash crop is really interesting in itself. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Pharaoh. Mark, please, if you have the time, have you read the questions?
Yes, I did. Yeah. So the question was relating basically to the unclear status of land and forced evictions. So from this is the main urban problem that I was referring to. And yes, indeed, the main struggles. Like if the activists are active in the kampung, and they in a democratic way try to assemble people and do organizing with local kampung organizers and local kampung activists, so to activate the kampung, that they have become sort of like democratic participants in the community. But then when there is a threat of eviction and forced resettlement, this is like an emergency, and this is then the major point, and this is basically a fight for the right to the city, for the right to live where they basically grew up, or where they were born. And so indeed there is the similarity. The urban poor activism is not limited to just one topic, but the most emergency topic is that of relocation and the fight against it, with all kinds of even legal measures. And the activists, some of them do study law right now in order to know what are their rights and what can be done on all levels to keep the communities in place. Maybe that is very short, but please do write me an email. It's on the last slide of my presentation to continue the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Maybe you can put down your email address on the chat box. Okay, we have a 5 minutes extension from the host. Thank you so much. Maybe we have one from Anelio and one from Pak Wijayanto, please.
Okay, thank you. So actually, I don't have question myself. Of course, I have some questions, but I'm with my students, so I will let them to ask the questions. And there are several of them actually. So I hope you are patient enough to give like at least 4 students to give questions. Thank you. Maybe you can start from. Yes, you can come here.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naila. Thank you for a great presentation. It's really interesting for us and very clear for us. So today I have a question for Mark. Yes, as we know, overall in a civil society, experiences repression in the political regime, whereas civil society, we have the right to express our aspiration, criticism, and suggestion in developing of our own territory. So, however, because of the threats that occur, many stop giving criticism and suggestion. So the question is, the question are, whether the activism in the village also experienced this repression or not, and if this repression occurs in the village, what is the government's policy in dealing with this, and to what extent has this activism been successful in aligning its agenda
In kampung, it's kampung.
in a kampung? Sorry, thank you. Is it clear or not?
Quick
Maybe
question.
if you have other questions from other students, we can pull
All right.
them.
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, I have a question for Mark also. Are they, the poor people in the city, already well organized as civil society associations? For example, already accountable or audited or not? Because in general, civil society in Indonesia is experiencing this problem. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, was this question to me? I didn't get the main question in the second.
Okay, so I have some question for Mr. Awesome. Okay, hello. I have some question for Mr.
Your name, please.
Ferdi Tajib, and my name is Nadena Nazifabudi. I'm from Visip Undip. So the question is, will the existence of the Waria and HIV communities in the future can be accepted by the society? And do the government already establish policy and be on the same side with the communities? Thank you.
Okay, questions to Mark and questions to Ferdi. We have another one.
All right, so good afternoon, honorable participants. I have a question regarding to the seminar webinar.
Your name, please.
My name is Muhammad Rizana Putra. I'm government science in Indonesia University. Considering Indonesia as a decentralized country, the establishment of policy in each decentralized area should be fulfilled based on the maximum value of society, especially between the urban and the rural area. But as we know, some of the government's regions in Indonesia does not well prepare on to establish a decentralized government itself. And it could hinder some of the management framework or the bureaucracy system, like some of the provinces in Indonesia, like the new provinces in Indonesia. Based on the research, what kind of challenges and aspects that should be watched by the government also and by the NGOs regard to these problems, since the correlation between the area of rural and urban nowadays are important and connected at the same time. Thank you.
Sorry, your question is to who?
Okay, Pak Jafar, thank you for being patient with my students and for all speakers, of course. And that will be it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Probably 2 minutes. Ferdi also another 2 minutes. And after this, probably we have a questions from Anielo.
I already write in the chat box.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. I just really understood the first student, but if you do not mind, because my email is in the chat, the student, I didn't get your name. You may please write me a quick email as well, and so because I think the discussion is quite interesting for further discussion. You see it down in the chat if you do not mind. Nevertheless, the way I understood, because you were referring to the kampung and how hegemony is experienced in the kampung or not. I would say the situation is not that clear that you can say, oh, everything is repressive on civil society in the kampung. Actually, because of the state or the city government more precisely being not so present in the kampung, the activists have quite some freedom and in some way much more freedom to act, to organize the communities, and then to go out of the kampung and make their claims in relation to the right to the city, claims in relation to all the urban problems that I was raising: waste management, water, electricity, but also poverty alleviation, access to education, democratic and cultural participation. We haven't talked about women issues and about feminism here much, but actually the very interesting part is that some of the early urban poor activists were also organizers of Varia in Jakarta. So now I need to read the question from Agnello, okay? And this is, where do I find it here? Could we talk about the migration of poverty? Yeah, so the thing is, the big question, I currently work for an NGO called Watch Indonesia. Our project is on urban transformation in Indonesia, and the current move from of the capital city is the migration of a government body of administrators and politicians. We cannot see any whatsoever organized transmigrasi of people from Jakarta, of urban population. This is not part of the plan. So basically, Jakarta has to tackle its problems with climate change, its problems with urban injustice and social injustice, especially. So the migration of poverty, I might see some problems of inequality with the new capital, that this new capital is probably a capital for the haves and the rich, and for the people of power in politics as well as businesses. So I do not see that from Jakarta, far away Jakarta, to the new capital Nusantara, there is a migration of like urban dwellers or of middle class people. Not many, probably not. Yeah, maybe so far. And I give over to the next questions.
Thank you, Mark. Next, Randy.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, with regards to Indonesian governments, and I say governments in plural because they entail different institutions and individuals and actors, basically, is that a lot of time also none of them are like intentionally oppressive, but a lot of them, the policies are based on disregard or negligence or ignorance, I would say. And so I guess a lot of the changes that's been made is also actually being through the fights that a lot of the community members are doing in order to change, their fate, including among the trans women and HIV communities. And with regards to that, also a lot of the practices that I explained to you earlier around the shelter is actually not only provided for trans women who are HIV positive, but it's also for everyone who are HIV positive, and it's not only for the people of Jogja, it's also for everyone, like coming from different islands and cities and the villages, because there is no kind of support provided in their local areas. There are some progress in terms of like how the local government in Jogja respond to it, as I mentioned to you about the Dinas Sosial support for the shelter. But again, it's not enough, because on the other hand, also there are some problematic practices with regards to how they deal with trans women who are working on the street, either as a sex worker or street musician, and how a lot of poor trans women, but also the broader poor community are criminalized through the Perda Gepeng, the local governance on homeless and street musicians. So by saying all this, basically, again, there are kind of like meeting points with regards to like progress and like positive developments on how HIV is being treated, but also we're still very far from eradicating discrimination and stigma, and it's still much of the biggest problem when it comes to dealing with HIV treatment and prevention.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating in our panel. Thank you also to Mark, Ferdi, and Veronica. Amanda and I will encourage all the contributors to write their papers, and we will have a publication probably in 2024. Again, thank you to organizers and Pak Wijayanto. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, Pak Jafar, for chairing an extremely interesting session. I think a very crucial issue about minorities in Indonesia, and I guess also some wonderful insights there. And I share the opinion with you that Mark, Ferdi, and Veronica should continue their presentation with the writing, with an article, and we would like I would very much like to read it. So everyone, it will be the end of the session, and I also would like to ask for apology because during in the middle presentation of Mark, there's a electricity cut here in Semarang, mati lampu, yeah, because this is Indonesia, maybe we're still minority as well. So apologize for that, and thank you everyone for the wonderful session. Now I will give the screen back to Gabriel, I guess, because there will be soon, yeah, after this, the wonderful roundtable. Gabriel or Catherine, maybe you can follow up.
Yes, thank you, Vijay. We got it. Thank you so much for hosting this panel. And also, thanks to the students for joining us. It was nice to also see people over there in Semarang in Indonesia.